Your neighbor thinks they know what your dog does when you leave. The barking that wakes the hallway, the frantic scratching under the front door, the chewed cushion on the floor. Most of us imagine either drama or peaceful napping. But hidden between those extremes is a surprisingly detailed story. One that cameras and careful studies are finally able to tell. Today, we're going to reveal what dogs really do when you're away. The timeline of behaviors, the quiet signals of stress, how dogs learn to anticipate absence, which common fixes actually work, and what science recommends when separation becomes a real problem. If you have a dog, stay with me. This may change how you think about leaving the house. Does your dog show signs before you even pick up your keys? Comment below and tell us what you notice. Imagine a front door closing. The key turns, footsteps fade down the hall, and a household returns to its private rhythms. For many dogs, the narrative that follows is not a continuous meltdown, but a sequence of predictable moves captured by cameras set up for research. One influential study filmed dogs and measured how quickly they started vocalizing and how soon they engaged in destructive behaviors. On average, barking or howling began surprisingly fast, about 3 minutes and 15 seconds after the owner left. Destructive acts, like chewing a shoe or tearing up a cushion, typically appeared within roughly 7 minutes. Those numbers aren't meant to shame anyone. They're practical timestamps that help us understand the pace at which separation distress often unfolds. But the overt noise and wreckage are only the front page of the story. Cameras and physiological monitoring reveal a second chapter you might miss when you walk back into a seemingly neat living room. Dogs often switch from obvious behaviors, barking, pacing, scratching, to a quieter, strained state. Their bodies don't simply calm down because their mouths close. In several studies, researchers recorded increases in panting, elevated heart rate, and hormonal markers of stress. These signs can persist even when a dog is lying still. In contrast, dogs without separation problems spend nearly all of their time resting calmly when left. One study found non-anxious dogs were passive about 97% of the time. That contrast shows how deceptive silence can be. Stillness is not always comfort. If we look across longer stretches of time, another pattern emerges. Anxious dogs often cycle through repeated episodes of distress. Video analyses have documented bursts of activity or vocalization that recur every 23 to 28 minutes. Think of it like a spike and decline. A barking episode, a tense quiet, then another spike. Those quiet intervals between spikes are not restful naps, but a tense holding pattern, which is why an otherwise calm-looking dog may still be experiencing repeated waves of stress throughout the time you're away. Why do dogs respond this way? Part of the explanation is learning. Dogs pick up on consistent cues around departure. Keys on a hook, the ritual of putting on shoes, the silent routine of gathering a bag, and they begin to anticipate absence before the door is even opened. This anticipatory stress can show up as pacing or attention to the owner during the pre-departure period. Research that follows dogs over time, including large-scale projects like Generation Pup, has highlighted how owner behavior and routine shape a dog's expectations. If the sound of keys reliably predicts a long absence, the dog learns that pattern. That means stress often starts earlier than the moment the door shuts. Owner behavior at the moment of return matters too, and perhaps more than we realize. Several observational studies and clinical histories have pointed out a common dynamic. When an owner comes home and reacts with loud frustration to find chewed shoes or a mess, the dog may learn to associate the owner's emotional response with the arrival itself. In some cases, exaggerated or upset greetings inadvertently reinforce the dog's anxious anticipation, because the arrival becomes a highly emotional event linked in the dog's mind with intense reactions. Conversely, calm, low-key returns are less likely to amplify anxiety patterns. Generation Pup data and clinical reviews suggest that how we behave before and after leaving, our departures and returns, help shape the future frequency and intensity of separation issues. There's also a physiological dimension that changes over time. Short-term stress responses are marked by spikes in hormones like cortisol and by arousal signs such as panting and elevated heart rate. Yet when anxiety becomes chronic, biological systems can shift into a different state. In some studies, severely distressed dogs showed lower long-term cortisol in hair samples, which researchers interpret as a kind of system burnout. The stress axis becomes dysregulated and may no longer produce the same acute spikes it once did. This isn't a relief. It's a sign that chronic stress has altered the dog's biology. Related work from groups at Linköping University and other institutions has even found correlations between owner and dog cortisol over time. Owner stress and the dog's stress markers can move in tandem, which highlights how intertwined their emotional lives are. So what about the things many owners try first? There are a lot of reasonably intuitive ideas that turn out to be less effective than hoped. The belief that a second dog will fix separation problems is one example. A 2021 multi-dog study examined households with more than one dog and found no clear protective effect. In some situations, adding another dog increased overall vocalization rather than calming things down. Pheromone diffusers, which promise to create a reassuring scent environment, and leaving the TV or radio on also show little to no sustained benefit in rigorous trials. Puzzle toys and food dispensers can be useful short-term distractors for some dogs, but they can backfire if the dog finishes the food quickly or becomes frustrated with the device. In short, these tools are not magic bullets. They may help some dogs a little, some of the time, but they are rarely sufficient as standalone solutions for clinically significant separation anxiety. What does the evidence support? First and foremost, gradual, carefully structured behavior modification is the primary path forward. The basic idea is straightforward. Change what the dog predicts about absence by creating a long history of departures that are harmless. This is done through graduated exposure, starting with tiny departures that do not trigger distress and progressively increasing duration. Practitioners working in clinics often cite practical milestones. Many report that building tolerance up to around 40 minutes is a meaningful tipping point for many dogs. That doesn't mean every dog will reach 40 minutes quickly, or that 40 minutes is a guaranteed milestone for all cases, but it's a helpful rule of thumb. If a dog reliably tolerates short absences, the next goal is to very gradually extend those times while keeping the dog calm. Clinical trials reinforce that combining behavioral modification with veterinary oversight improves outcomes in severe cases. One large trial involving over 200 dogs compared behavior-only plans with a combination of behavior modification plus medication. The trial found a notably higher proportion of improvement in the combined group, about 73%, versus 51% in the behavior-only group. These figures suggest that for some dogs, pharmacotherapy can be an important adjunct to training, particularly when anxiety is intense enough to prevent effective learning. Importantly, medications should always be used under guidance from a veterinarian or veterinary behaviorist. They are tools to support learning and calm the dog enough to participate in training, not shortcuts. How should an owner translate this into practical action? Start with observation and modest changes you can implement immediately. Watch for pre-departure signs. Does your dog follow you to the door, fixate on your keys, or begin pacing when you grab a bag? These subtle cues tell you where the anticipatory stress is starting. Try to make departures as unremarkable as possible. Avoid extended, emotional goodbyes that heighten arousal. When you return, aim for a calm, low-energy greeting for a period of time. This helps remove the emotional payoff that could otherwise reinforce the anticipation. For training, the graduated exposure approach must be slow and consistent. Begin with micro-departures, simply touching the door handle and returning, progressing to stepping outside and immediately returning, then adding seconds, then minutes, always staying below the threshold that triggers distress. If the dog becomes anxious at a given step, you've moved too fast and should step back. Because this work is nuanced, many owners benefit from partnering with a qualified trainer or veterinary behaviorist who can design a program, monitor progress, and adjust timelines. For severe or persistent cases, where daily functioning is significantly affected, the dog injures itself trying to escape, or destructive behavior is extreme. Professional assessment is especially important. A clinician can evaluate medical contributors, consider medication as a support, and help create a personalized plan. There are a few practical markers to watch. If your dog starts barking or becomes destructive within minutes, that tells you the onset is rapid and immediate interventions need to focus on short-term departures and desensitization to departure cues. If your dog shows cycles of distress over the course of an hour or more, those 23 to 28-minute spikes, then the dog may be experiencing repeated waves of arousal that require sustained behavior change and possibly pharmacological support to enable learning. If a dog appears outwardly calm but has other signs, panting, pacing when you return, excessive licking, that could indicate underlying physiological stress even when the environment looks tidy. Finally, keep in mind owner stress. Your own anxiety around leaving affects your dog, so strategies that reduce your tension, routine, predictability, and professional guidance can improve outcomes for both of you. It's also useful to set realistic expectations. Progress takes time. Even with excellent training and veterinary oversight, change is often incremental. Weeks to months for meaningful improvement in many cases. The goal is measurable betterment rather than overnight cures. Celebrate the small wins, a longer quiet interval, reduced intensity of vocalization, calmer returns, and use those as evidence that the dog's predictive model is being updated. One more practical note about commonly tried products. If you use a pheromone diffuser, a radio left on, or puzzle feeders, do so as part of a broader plan, rather than as a fix. Monitor your dog's reactions and be ready to pivot if a tool doesn't help or, worse, creates frustration. For puzzle toys, offer them early and preferably rotate options so novelty doesn't wear off. For multi-dog households, be cautious about assuming a second dog will fix separation problems. Closely observe how dogs affect each other and consult a behaviorist if vocalization or stress increases. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not alone. Separation anxiety is one of the most common behavioral challenges seen by vets and trainers. The encouraging part is that research points to practical, evidence-based strategies that work for many dogs. Graduated exposure, tailored behavior modification, and professional involvement, sometimes paired with medication, offer a credible path toward improvement. What's most important is responding with curiosity rather than blame. Watch, document, and partner with professionals who can help translate observations into targeted interventions. To recap the main reveals. Cameras show many dogs start vocalizing very quickly, about 3 minutes and 15 seconds after you leave, and destructive acts can appear within 7 minutes. Even when visible behavior quiets, physiological stress can continue, often cycling in spikes every 23 to 28 minutes. Dogs learn departure patterns from cues like keys and shoes, and owner reactions at return influence future behavior. Quick fixes like adding another dog, pheromones, or leaving the TV on are commonly ineffective alone. The most reliable path is gradual, predictable training with veterinary support where needed. For some dogs, combining behavior work with medication leads to better outcomes than behavior alone. If you suspect your dog is struggling, start with careful observation and modest changes to your departure and return routines, and consider consulting a qualified behaviorist or veterinarian if the problem is severe. Watch your own stress too. Dogs pick up on it more than we often realize. And remember, helping a dog through separation issues is a process that asks for patience, consistency, and compassion. If this revealed a few surprises for you, tell us in the comments. Does your dog start showing signs before you even touch your keys? Share one behavior you've noticed and when it typically happens. If you found this useful, subscribe for more science-backed insights about our animals. Next time, we'll look at what cats do when you're gone. Thank you for watching and for caring enough to learn what your dog is experiencing when the house is quiet.